Amy Wong and Lieutenant Kif Croker have been dating for 3 years now, but Kif remains stationed on board the Nimbus, and the long-distance nature of their relationship is hard for both of them. Missing her squishy alien paramour, Amy hijacks the Planet Express ship during a mission so she can go visit him. Upon arrival, Kif asks Amy to move in with him, but she gently declines, saying that there's still more she wants to do on her own. In the middle of this conversation, an accident occurs and everyone walks away with minor injuries. As they receive treatment in the aftermath, the medical officer drops a bombshell that Kif is pregnant. Everyone is shocked, but Kif explains that his species reproduce through touch, becoming fertile when they experience powerful feelings of love, as Kif does for Amy. When this happens, they can absorb genetic material through their skin, such as when Kif's glove came off during the accident. Fry points out that everyone touched Kif's hands at some point during the commotion, and a quick paternity test performed by the professor claims that the genetic material came not from Amy, but from Leela. Kif is unperturbed, as in his culture, the one considered the other parent is the one who caused the feelings of love in the first place. The term Kif uses is smizmar, and he is delighted to raise children alongside the woman he loves. Amy finds her own feelings more complex. Ultimately, during the baby shower, Amy finds herself overwhelmed. Declaring that she can't do this and she isn't ready for motherhood, Amy flees in tears, but before Kif can chase after her, the babies start to stir. He's almost ready to give birth and must make a journey to his home planet to bring these new lives into the world in the same swamp where he himself was born. While he is understandably reluctant to do this without Amy, it appears he has no other choice. The Planet Express crew accompany Kif and bear witness as he performs the birthing ceremony. All of the traditions that one would typically perform with their smizmar only serve to underline the crushing loneliness he feels without Amy by his side. But then, Amy emerges from the jungle, having realized that her love for Kif and desire to spend her life with him are more important than her fear of motherhood. And so Kif gives birth to newborn tadpoles, safely making their way to the water as their parents watch over them. As Amy holds him close, Kif marvels at the miracle of life, telling her that in a few years they will emerge from their water as children, and Amy reassures him that by then, she will be ready. Welcome to Space Podcast 3000, where the future is in the past.
Oh boy, the Mpreg episode.
Yeah.
I like that they do kind of explain, yeah, that's just kind of how it works with Kif's species, because it's not completely unprecedented. You look at stuff like seahorses.
Okay, so I want to know how his species actually works with reproduction, because, like, if this is how it works with reproduction, where it can just be with anyone, you know, and it just is based on emotions and then physical contact in general, why do they seem to have binary genders?
I don't know.
Like the best that I can think of is maybe they don't, and Kif just chose for himself after meeting humans and learning that it was an option.
Maybe.
Which could be interesting, but except, like, the midwife at the end of the episode has breasts, so there is clearly some kind of sexual dimorphism, and so I don't even know what the deal is here. It just raises so many questions.
Unless they can alter their bodies in a certain way to match their desired appearance.
Or maybe they start off as one way, and then once they reach their adulthood, they go one way or the other. It just raises too many questions.
Yeah. That said, like, there is a lot in this episode where just, like, I can definitely sympathize with the difficulty of long-distance relationships.
Yeah.
And, you know, and Kif's issues here, because, like, I have two. And it's hard because so often when one of my girlfriends is having just a terrible day, and I wish I could just, you know, wrap her in a blanket and feed her snacks, but I can't do that from halfway across the country. Someday.
Someday. Eventually. Well, we're not in a freaking pandemic.
Oh.
And speaking of responsibility, that really is kind of the main crux of this episode, with Amy just like, yes, she is way too young to be a mother.
A little bit, yeah. And actually, her being open with Kif about not being ready to live together yet, even before the pregnancy scare, like, that level of frank communication about their feelings is why I've said that these two have the most healthy romantic relationship on the show.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's good to see this sort of thing in a comedy.
Although, speaking of which, there is a really great background joke during the scene where everyone's crammed into Kif's tiny room, where if you look, Bender is stuck inside the closet, and it's like implied that he's in there just because that's the only place where there's room for him.
And they had to actually take his head off just so he would fit.
Yeah.
Honestly, there were so many really good jokes in this episode, like Scruffy's rolling out a large pill.
It's a really large pill.
It is! Or the background gag of Leela's reading glasses on her bedside table and they only have one lens.
Right, yeah.
At least she got them custom made.
The background gags on Amy's calendar, which have a lot of cute references to the type of character she is.
I saw adopt every puppy.
Yeah. My favorites were in order: lunch with Molly, trash Molly with Tina, trash Tina with Molly, find new friends.
I wasn't even reading those. They just went by so quickly. I wasn't even looking at them.
I also spotted search couch for spare millions and benefit for divorced princesses because Amy's family is rich. As well as hang with Walter Koenig. I would love to hang with Walter Koenig, actually. If you don't know off the top of your head who that is, he was an actor in the original Star Trek. He played Chekhov.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Although personally for me, I'm more familiar with his role as Alfred Bester, the slimy bastard on Babylon 5, and he was fantastic in that. Just really good actor. Very underrated.
Also in the cinematic classic Game Over.
He was in a lot of stuff.
Actors tend to be in a lot of stuff.
Oh yeah, there were also some nods in Amy's calendar to her status as a grad student. Tolstoy seminar, and then one that was finish thesis and buy stocks.
Neat.
So the grad student thing and the rich thing. Just
Right.
a lot of really nice little gags in the calendar. I just really liked it. Thankfully, I'm good at reading things fast.
Yeah.
But God, the best joke in this episode was definitely the Angry Dome.
Yes. I forget, do we see it again later?
No, I think this is the only appearance of the Angry Dome.
Which is funny because it became such a huge meme.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a really good joke.
I think the best joke in this whole episode is just Kif's reaction when he finds out that Zap isn't the father. Because you know he's just absolutely thinking about this whole thing and just dreading everything, and then it comes out and it's like, oh, thank you, sweet merciful God. Just his absolute relief.
I mean, I think anyone would react that way.
Yeah, Zap as a Zap as a parent or even a biological parent is honestly kind of a horrifying idea.
Could you imagine he would just never shut up about it because you see how terribly he treats Kif now that he would have this over him.
And actually, Leela being the biological mother is interesting because apparently during the writing of this episode, they went back and forth a lot on whether or not Amy should be the biological mother.
Huh.
They weren't sure whether the episode would be better one way or the other.
And like, shout outs of course to Leela for just being so incredibly supportive. It's just she's down for helping him for anything she needs to do, which is it comes off much less like it's her it's her own DNA. She wants to protect it, but it really just comes off as her being a good friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's like, she doesn't even hesitate. She's just down to help him. Which just goes so much into explaining how much more mature Leela is than Amy, even though they don't seem to be that much older. She doesn't seem to be that much older than Amy.
Yeah, I don't know what their age difference is. It's never really made clear. I mean, they couldn't be that far apart because, they're probably around the same age as Fry, and Fry has dated or will date both of them. So, I don't know.
It could also be a subtle nod to the fact that Amy comes from a family of rich people, whereas Leela came from an orphanage and she had to work her whole life, so she did have to mature quicker. That's
true. Amy would have had a pretty sheltered upbringing.
Yeah.
Actually, one thing I forgot to mention earlier, so the Angry Dome, can you guess what inspired it?
Get Smart?
Yeah, the Cone of Silence. I don't know how many of our listeners would be familiar with Get Smart because this was a decades-old sitcom.
I'm only really kind of familiar with it through osmosis as well, so I've never watched it, but I just know it's kind of a spoof of spy dramas.
I mean, that's exactly what it was. It was sort of this James Bond spoof and a very funny one. I watched it all the time in syndication when I was a kid. But because it's such an old show, I should probably mention. So the Cone of Silence was a running joke where whenever they need to do a mission briefing, it's supposed to prevent people outside from hearing anything that's said inside, and it's like this plastic dome that descends from the ceiling. Except in practice, the people inside can't hear each other, and it doesn't prevent anyone outside from hearing it.
Good job, whoever invented that.
Yeah, again, the joke is that they have this, and he insists on using it every time because that's protocol, but it just doesn't work.
And this is the same show that had a cell phone and a shoe.
According to the episode commentary, they couldn't decide for a while whether or not to have the professor be audible to the audience outside the Angry Dome, and they ultimately decided it was funnier if you could hear him.
Yeah, I think if you couldn't hear him, he should be more visibly angry than sort of just kind of walking around the way he was.
Well, I do like the incoherent angry noises. That is intrinsically very
Yes.
funny. But now that I think about it, they never do finish the mission.
No,
Oh, yeah, they never
don't.
did.
Yeah, Amy hijacks the ship to visit Kif, and the delivery is just forgotten. Like, I know it's not the point of the episode, and they have bigger things to worry about, but I do feel bad for the client who never got their pain meds.
And that's something that they have done in previous episodes. The fact that they ditched, like, that would happen in the Nibbler episode where they ditched the cargo, and then they got yelled at the ends that you're gonna have to work for me for years to pay back that cargo that you jettisoned.
That wasn't the Nibbler episode, that was the Cyclops episode.
Right.
But
Okay.
I know what you're talking about. Let's see what else here. God, the Hollow Shed.
Yeah, because that was
Hollow
another thing
Shed.
that I noticed about this episode is that because they needed some sort of crisis where Kif would have his hand ungloved, and it could have been anything, but instead they went with the hollow shed malfunction, which is really kind of a trope that's been done a lot. And they really kind of established that it's possible here. So they're like, yeah, but if it happens, we're going for the obvious Star Trek parody here.
Yeah, it really is a great spoof of the weirdest, most nonsensical part of Star Trek. Like, the idea that it's programmed in BASIC is hysterical to me.
I mean, they didn't have as many options back then.
Oh, they had plenty of options. It's just because BASIC, that's the thing, is that BASIC is such an anachronism. It'd be like programming in COBOL.
And then the following scene in the sickbay is just yet more Star Trek jokes. And really, anytime Zap is around, they're probably taking the piss out of Star Trek at least a little bit. So we finally get a definition for the word smizmar, which doesn't quite mesh with how it's been used before, but you know what? I'll take it.
Was it used before?
Twice. There was an announcer in the Ultimate Robot Fighting episode who was saying "ladies and gentlemen" and smizmars, and then a movie. I think it was a movie that was like "When a Man Loves a Smizmar." So, like, before this point, it was definitely meant something at least a little bit different when they were thinking about it, and they just reused it here.
That's strange because I don't remember I imagine those did happen, but it's weird because this seems like the kind of word that they would have picked something else that they knew they hadn't used before. Because this is the kind of situation, this is a concept that demands a definition. Like, it's a definition, so obviously if this is how things work in their society, then they would have a specific word for it.
Yeah, well, I only really noticed this because I was paying attention in the previous episodes where it came up, and I remember even pointing it out in our episodes about those previous episodes, or at least with the Ultimate Robot Fighting one.
Yeah, because, like,
I know I brought it up.
and you would remember it because you had seen this episode where it is prominently given a definition.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's interesting. Like, it is definitely a retcon, but it's such a minor thing because it was just little jokes before.
And she was called the Smiz wife, wasn't she?
I'm pretty sure she was just the Grand Midwife.
Yeah.
Although it is funny how Amy's parents finally accept her relationship because their desire for grandchildren is more important to them than their dislike of Kif.
It's so stereotypical, but honestly, any it's usually shown in comedies and whatnot that, oh, the Asian parents always want grandkids. But it's honestly very true for parents of any race, from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's not specific to Asian parents.
Yeah, it's just often attributed to them.
I've never seen this specific connection with Asian parents. I've seen it in all kinds of different groups and such. Like I've seen it associated with Jewish parents, with just, white parents, with just it just seems to be a common trope in general. But it really is the defining characteristic of Amy's parents in this series.
Going back for a moment to talk about use of words in this, that's just one thing that I love about English. You can just invent a word like maternifuge, and you know exactly what it means without them having to define it, because yeah, it's a spinning object that filters out the mother. It's like, yeah, it's the maternifuge.
Don't get me started on the maternifuge, because the professor says it'll spin at 10,000 rotations per minute. That would kill them.
Maybe it just didn't get up to full speed. Maybe that's just its max speed.
Okay, but why was it designed to rotate at deadly speeds in the first place?
It's
Because
the
why not?
professor!
Okay, you know what? That's a fair answer. So how about the stuff on Kif's home planet?
They don't really make the home planet all that interesting. It's just kind of a swamp.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll see a bit more of it in, I think, one of the movies, but we didn't get to see much of it now, and there's actually a reason for that. A lot was cut from this episode. So as the gang treks to the jungle to reach the swamp for Kif to give birth, Bender gets nearly eaten by a giant toad until Kif intimidates it and it spits him out and runs away. So according to the episode commentary, they originally had a whole thing written out where Kif had to complete a lengthy series of trials, and it was basically an entire episode's worth of material on its own that had to be completely excised due to time constraints, and that toad is all that was left.
Wow.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Because they did kind of lean into the joke that he has to do all these things alone without Amy there. And they kind of pushed that a little bit. They had a bit of the humor in that with the ancient tea that you actually see the tea bag in it.
Well, what I think with having all that stuff cut out is it really highlights the problem that a lot of modern streaming shows have in their pacing, where because they're freed from the constraints of 30 or 60-minute time slots, they can just throw in whatever the hell the writers and showrunners have the budget to film. And so they often end up with all of this excess cruft that doesn't really add that much. And you should always force your writers to cut 5 to 10% of everything they've written, just to force them to actually reevaluate what matters most,
Yeah, absolutely. Because, obviously, you don't want to use every idea you come up with. It's good to have a lot of ideas, but not all those ideas are good. So, yeah, it's important to call things. That's true for writing for anything, really.
And then you also, remove any filler scenes and what. It often sucks to lose good material, but cutting stuff down to the bone, it really is how you end up with your most tightly written stories.
And I remember that saying is something is perfect not when there's nothing else to add, but when there's nothing else to take out.
Yeah, exactly.
And unused concepts are great for fan fiction.
Now, to be fair, sometimes you remove things that shouldn't be removed. What comes immediately to mind to me is Terminator 2, where there are a few deleted scenes that were restored in the director's cut, and the movie honestly feels a lot more complete with them there.
Yeah. Because, the literal next scene after, resetting the switch is him learning about the thing in the visor. And then John going, "Are we learning yet?" And, that's perfectly encapsulates it. But also the whole thing with him is if I'm going to be this great military leader, maybe you should be starting listening to some of my military ideas once in a while.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I feel like that scene is kind of vital, because it is a major part of John's arc, and it just feels incomplete without it.
Yeah.
And there's also stuff like Everything Everywhere All at Once, which I absolutely adore that movie. It is one of my favorite movies from the last several years, and yet there is a little bit from the climax that was cut out for pacing. But if you watch the deleted scene, it actually wraps up some things that are kind of left hanging in the final cut of the movie. And that's another thing that I feel should have been left in personally. Just you see this every once in a while, but we're kind of getting sidetracked. The point I was trying to get to is most of the time you do need to just cut things and just cut and cut and cut until there really is nothing else that you can remove. Because otherwise you get one of these modern streaming shows that just goes on for way too long and has a lot of stuff that goes nowhere.
You definitely want people, if you have to go one way or the other, you want people wanting more than wanting less.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. So is there anything else?
I have nothing more to say. I guess that there's nothing more.
Yeah, I didn't really have a whole lot to say about this episode. Eden, what about you?
I was planning on a rant, but then it wasn't as bad as I remembered it being, so.
What were you planning on ranting about?
Just the whole Mpreg trope in general, because...
Oh.
It could have been done so much worse.
It really could have.
If you want to see how it could have been done worse, you look at the Bender episode with the beer.
Yeah. Yeah. Or Red Dwarf almost did an Mpreg plot. And they kind of did actually. So there was a whole bit in Red Dwarf where one of the male characters gets pregnant, and they were planning to do a whole storyline with this. But then as they were trying to write it, they realized there really was no way to do it without it being gross and uncomfortable. So they just kind of wrote it out in a text crawl between seasons, and it was never mentioned again.
Well, at least they learned their lesson before the people who made Junior never learned that lesson.
Oh God, that movie. I do not want, the less I think about Junior, the better.
But yeah, it often falls into a lot of transphobic tropes.
Yeah, like...
They're very misogynistic as well.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings on this episode. Like, there is some really dated and language used in places, but it is still handled a lot better than it could have been.
Definitely.
And I really like the character development and world building.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of all the Mpreg, the ways you could have done Mpreg, this is probably one of the better ways of doing it.
Really, my biggest issue with the episode isn't even the pregnancy itself. It's that Amy is the one with the biggest character arc here, but due to the format of the episode, it all happens off screen. Like, we never see what actually got her to change her mind on all this, you know? We see her run out, afraid and not wanting to commit to anything. And then, they go through the jungle, they arrive, and then Amy suddenly shows up having changed, and it's like, could we not have seen that happen? Seen her thinking about this and just...
Yeah, and they already had to cut so much out of the episode, it's possible that they cut out that part as well.
It's possible, but, that is one thing that shouldn't have been cut, because that really is the heart of the episode. Amy's character arc. And it just gets completely skipped over. And this isn't even the first Kif Amy episode where Amy gets sidelined more than she should have, and her intended arc suffers for it. We saw this as well in Amazon Women in the Mood, where it just feels so sudden.
Yeah. It's a shame, but it's still a good episode for Kif and Amy in the end.
Yeah, I wouldn't say this is a great episode, but it's definitely... decent enough.
Especially if you're a fan of Kif and Amy as a couple, then it's a must-see episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be kind to your Smizmars.
Thank you for listening to Space Podcast 3000. Your three voices of the future are Nova Altman, Doug Hancox, and Eden Valerie. The theme music is Voxel Revolution by Kevin MacLeod. You can support the show and listen to new episodes a full week early at patreon.com/SpacePod3K. Follow us on Twitter at SpacePod3K. Be sure to join us next time as the Planet Express crew uncovers secrets of the past in Leela's home world.